The second book in the Gunslinger series, The Drawing of Three by Stephen King. The first book piqued my interest. I didn't necessarily love it, but it had enough for me to pick up the second book and have high hopes. I really liked the religious themes that were kind of deliciously spread out throughout the story. The setting felt very gritty while not overly grimdark in a try-hard kind of way, and Stephen King's very typical, just elevated writing style and flawless technique made it a decent story, and the only thing that really lacked for me was character. I wasn't really hooked by anybody, and unfortunately with a fantasy book, that's a crippling blow, but I was hoping book 2 could add a lot more character to the story, and it did. A lot of really weird character. So the book 2 of Gunslinger, it picks up on the same kind of dark tone that the first book ended on, and it continues that and explores the gunslinger going through some odd circumstances, and the story elaborates on how this jaded old fighter would kind of experience a new setting, let's put it that way, as well as some extreme characters that he has to encounter. How does he deal with these type of people that are very different than anything he's ever dealt with before? I liked all of that a good bit. It was interesting. That being said, nearly every plot point and major decision that King made as the author of this story had me asking, why the hell am I reading this? Not in the sense that I don't want to be reading it, but in the sense that how did we end up here? What logical progression of events led to this? It seems so bizarre and totally abandons the Western type atmosphere that's established in the first book for a much more typical fantasy world hopping type feeling. I did not like that really at all. While this book did make up for the lack of character I felt in the first book, this second book has dropped the ball in terms of everything else, in my opinion. It felt like it was trying so hard to just be weird and kooky. Like Stephen King saw the internet really likes he used to do drugs, so he was like, oh, I'll make it seem like I'm doing them again, because that's the only logical explanation for why you wrote this.
Whenever he depth charged someone, for that was how he always thought of it, as depth charging, he came in his pants. The baggy sweatshirt also covered the wet spot, which invariably formed on his jeans.
The King has an obsession for writing this psychosexual material, stuff that's just very intense internal sexual dialogue for characters. And if it was handled with more tact and delivered with a little more of a clever shroud, it would really work. But it's so forcefully blunt from King here that it just comes across as ham-fisted and just over the top and gross. There's nothing it's adding to the story, and if it was, I wouldn't mind it at all. It just takes you out of the story, and you're just standing there like, why is this a thing? It doesn't progress anything. You're obviously just adding it for shock value, which is something King's been guilty of for a long time. The ending of It comes to mind clearly. There's a whole other video I could do on that. King's a prolific writer, one of the best of our time, easily. There's a reason he's one of the wealthiest, best-sold authors in history. That being said, I do have big issues with a lot of the things he does, and he's not my particular taste. Well, I can see how the Dark Tower series would be very enticing for people who want a refresh, something different from what they've been reading in the fantasy genre, and maybe even kind of like a horror suspense vibe. They want something to change up from that. This could be a way to go. But coming from it from just a analytical, did this story make sense? Did it do what it wanted to well? I'm not really feeling it, honestly. It's such a bizarre blend. Rarely do you see technical writing and such a creative world built, but the plot and storyline that progresses in this story and great writing just feels off. Like it's not well thought out. There was no planning here. And I actually saw an interview from King where he's admitted he has no idea where it's going. It seems to have the same kind of problem Star Wars is having right now. One writer to the next writer doesn't know where the story's going. King talking to King, like he doesn't know where he's gonna take it in the next book. And with that being the case, as a writer, you can't have big overarching, smarter, deeper meanings to your story. You're contained to what you're writing right then, and that comes across so clearly here. It has very much so the feeling of The Last Jedi in that way to me. It feels like a very self-contained story that doesn't care about what's before or after. It's just, let's go down this crazy, wacky, weird, wild path and have fun with it. And I really don't like that. The fantasy genre is something that's supposed to allow authors to really explore bigger, wider concepts, really engage on an imaginary landscape that can just bend and push what normal stories can tell. And King's been very good at that in the past, but doesn't really do anything with it here. It's a massive attempt that feels like it has no target. All that negative stuff being said, I still have a lot of respect for this series up until this point. There's been some bold choices, to say the least. King is willing to twist and bend a narrative in ways that you will not see coming. And that's why I'm saying, if you want something that's going to come across as new or kind of just taste different than what you've had in the fantasy genre before, or maybe even kind of just the weird Western vibes going on, go ahead, dive right in. I think you'll like it for that reason. And if you just like very typical, flat, gunslinger type characters, you'll have that kind of character to latch onto as well. There is that typical Western trope gunslinger here who isn't pushing the bar of what the gunslinger is at all. King somehow managed to drop all my favorite aspects of this story from the last book. There's no Men in Black progression. There's none of that religious tension and setting explored or grown in any deeper way, and that's incredibly disappointing. And it's why I'm not going to continue with the Dark Tower for now. I'm jumping back over to The Witcher for a little bit, and I'll progress through that series a little bit more. And now I'm going to shift a little bit to a wider critique of King's writing as a whole. I do think he's one of the best writers out there. Anyone who tries to deny that doesn't know what they're talking about. He is phenomenal. He's written so many classics. He's able to really just bend what a typical story arc should be in a way that makes sense, where it doesn't feel like he's trying hard. And even here in Gunslinger, I didn't feel like he was trying hard, but it felt aimless was the problem. And this is where he's hit or miss for me. King is prolific, but it seems like every now and then he forgets what he's trying to prolificize. It's kind of that druggy vibe almost a little bit again, but I feel like he was somehow more focused when he was on drugs. And I'm not in any way advocating for drug use among creative people, obviously. I just hope he's not trying to recapture that feeling for the readers, because it felt like that for me. It felt like, let me try to be weird. Let me try to push it in a way that has this manic vibe. In my opinion, does not help a story at all. The reason we like Crazy King was because he was able to bring things out of a hat we've never seen an author pull out before. That's impressive. But here, it just seems like he's pulling stuff out of a hat while you're done with it. You're not feeling it anymore, and he's just following you around, desperately trying to recapture what he did when he wrote The Shining. Honestly, from a career perspective, I was hoping by now Stephen King would have matured a little bit. I would like to see some more adult material coming out for him, in the sense that he is more comfortable with what he writes, maybe just do some more psychological stuff, and he seems to be backpedaling almost. We're not getting the bar of It or The Shining when it comes to examining people. We're just getting, oh, wouldn't it be weird and wacky, and what if we introduce this type of character, and let's talk about some cum in some pants. That's not interesting. The Shining was interesting with its crazy kookiness because it really broke down how to break a person, how to exploit addiction, things like that, to really pull them to their worst state. None of that's happening here. There's no smart analysis or takedown. It's all fluff, it feels like to me. And there's great technical writing with that fluff. It's still King writing. That's why it can be really confusing as a reader getting into it. Overall, for the drawing of 3, I'm feeling a please step it up out of 10, because I know he can do better. I know King is a better writer than what he presented in the drawing of 3, and the reason I'm still willing to pick up more Dark Tower books in the future is I'm hoping he gets more comfortable in the genre and the world that he's building and established in here. There's still so much potential here. I still like the characters being built. I kind of like the flat gunslinger being the person we're following. It lets other things take center stage while the narrative progresses, which is really cool, and I like having that narrative being so shifting, so fluid throughout what's happening. There's no real singular focus, and I feel like that can really be built in this world in a cool way. But as of right now, that focus is not finding anything. It's all blurry, and I'm hoping, I'm still fingers crossed, I will pick up Dark Tower possibly in a couple more months, but as of right now, I'm gonna give it a rest for a little bit, switch back over to The Witcher. I also want to read the original Bram Stoker's Dracula, so expect that in the future. I hope you guys can convince me as well, motivate me to pick up The Dark Tower again, because I've had real high praise for it in the comments before, and I know you're not wrong. I know this series has potential, and I'm looking for it. I'm hoping I find it. But as of right now, I'm gonna take a break. I hope you guys like this video. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Hit the dislike button if you thought this was a terrible review. Criticize my criticisms. I want that. You know what I mean? But have a good one, y'all. I hope you're having a wonderful week and not a massive headache like I am right now. Peace.